So toxicity has been a problem at work for a long time now, but it's really a hot topic. Recently, I saw a post on LinkedIn that started with "Stop calling everyone toxic or narcissist," and pointed at the problem that if we label everybody that way, then we miss the opportunity to identify an underlying problem. So it's easy to label things we don't like as toxic, but is it? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams. This is the HR Hub, and on the show we talk about anything related to HR. I encourage you to subscribe to the show or podcast to keep learning from my guests. So today my guest is Dr. Kevin Sansberry. Kevin's a behavioral scientist and the host of the Toxic Leadership podcast. He works with complex and larger organizations solving business problems related to human capital and leadership development, and his wonderful mission, which really resonated with me, and that's to ensure that everyone is able to use their voice and given a fair shot to succeed. I love that. Hi, Kevin. How are you?
Hello. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's one I've been wanting to have for a while because I do see a lot of inflammatory stuff going around about I'm in a toxic workplace, my boss is toxic, my coworkers are toxic. So I think I'd like to, get some clarity on what toxicity really is. So just diving right in, what are some signs of a toxic workplace or a toxic coworker, however you want to phrase it?
Yeah. So before I give the signs, let's go back to the statement of what the label, and I totally agree with the notion of labeling. Actually, though it provides ease of conversing about something, it muddies up meaning, and so let's do some meaning making here. So when I talk about toxicity in the workplace, a lot of the toxic leadership constructs you see in the research look at negative outcomes to the business. It looks at, you'll see retention, things like that. If I wanted to boil it down and say, what are toxic behaviors? I would really look at those behaviors that are destructive and leading to destruction of relationships and connection. So that could be gossiping, that could be microaggression, that could be belittling, intimidation. The list, we could be here all day naming things that are destructive to the function of human relationship and things like that, and connection. And so really that's what we're talking about. And then two, when we talk about labeling, toxic leadership is an easy way to, label a podcast, obviously. But what we're really talking about are toxic leadership behaviors, not toxic people. And I want to make sure we understand that people aren't toxic. They can do toxic things. They could, their behavior could spread negatively, but the human condition, we're everything. We're human. We can make mistakes. We can do great things, and everybody has a propensity to do that. And so when we talk about toxicity, toxic leadership, et cetera, we're focused on a particular set of behaviors that tend to lead to a widening of relationship or a gap in connection, and more destructive behavior. And so is that clear on how I'm doing that one first?
Yeah, I love that. I feel lighter already.
Okay, yeah, because everybody, I'm sure we all have the propensity to micromanage. I'm sure we all have times when we raise our voice and we might be yelling even. That happens. And so when we talk about common signs, to answer your question, let's start with the workplace. So common signs in a workplace typically would be if you tend to see that dissonance between what we say and what we do. You see a difference. So for example, we operate like a family, which I hate when I hear that. But we operate, you're right. Yeah, we operate like a family. So you're assuming, we have trust and all this kind of stuff, but yet nobody trusts anybody. And you have outcomes such as people are stressed and overworked. You have outcomes such as not only is our intention to stay low, but you have a lot of turnover. And so you see a lot of like a revolving door of employees and things like that. And these are things more so you would see at the macro level.
Mm-hmm.
At the departmental level, you would assume that you have a well-working team. But no, you would see some of those same behaviors penetrating into the department where people want to be trusted and be heard, but yet they don't speak up in meetings because they feel like they're afraid to and cannot. You don't see leaders proactively asking for feedback and things like that. And so a lot of these behaviors are typically deemed toxic because not only are they destructive, but they spread and it's pervasive. That's why it's toxic. It it's pervasive and it spreads to not only the macro level around the organization, but all the way to the department level where you would hope you have the best kind of safest relationship, but you tend not to. So that's where you see the most kind of toxic workplace behaviors manifesting, like similar to that.
It sounds a little bit like the opposite of psychological safety.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. It's essentially you are living in survival. You're working in survivor mode, and so you're not really in a mindset to thrive. You're not even taking those psychological and social risks. You don't feel like you can. You're just trying to get the job done with the least friction as possible. And you're not bringing up new ideas anymore. And so it's like the complete opposite of psychological safety.
When you in some ways, when you describe it like that, I know that some people who are being performance managed got performance issues. Maybe they're the source of some of the toxicity. They're not getting along with coworkers. How do we distinguish between, so that person who's being performance managed says, I'm in a toxic environment. Look at all the things they're doing to me versus a real toxic environment.
Yeah, no, that's actually a great question. Typically when we talk about toxicity, I kind of jump down the label and ask them, well, what do you mean? I want to get that understood, because to be honest, if I stay at the level of just like saying this is a toxic work environment and allowing someone to use that label without diving deeper, yeah, of course, I'm not going to know what to do. I don't know. Your toxic is not my toxic. So I actually wouldn't know how to help that person. And so when working with a person like that, I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? And can you tell me, a bit about your experience? What's going on? And so they'll say, HR is like, they put me on this PIP and they're working with my boss and they're not telling me if I'm going to get fired or not. And now my boss is asking for a weekly update. You start hearing like pretty reasonable stuff given the context. And so they can label all they want, but at the end of the day, I now have an understanding of what they're going through. And I don't have to agree that is, how I would define toxic. If that's what they view as toxic, that they're going to have a hard time working in any organization, because that is setting expectations. And so again, I go back to the original definition of behaviors and actions that lead to a widening of relationships or destruction of a relationship. Me setting expectations is a job. Me checking in on your work on a weekly basis because you haven't communicated with me before, that's holding expectations. That's my job. And so people don't have to agree with what occurs to them, but we can be a little reasonable here and see how that's not necessarily destroying relationships. That's having expectations, that's creating systems of accountability.
Yeah, okay. Another example, and something that I think is sometimes understood as toxicity, but I'm not sure it is.
Yeah.
Is that employee that says that maybe doesn't fit in the organization, but wants to get things done and is maybe in an organization that does things slowly. And so they're just charging ahead, trying to bust down all the barriers and get stuff done. And people who are comfortable in their day-to-day work and they don't want to be disrupted, they might label that as toxic because maybe that person goes over their head to get things done. What's your take on that?
That's a contextual answer. I'm going to give you it depends. But the way to look at that is there are some organizations whose cultures are highly conventional, and that has some positives, but that also has some negatives. And what kind of the negative there is they tend to be slower to innovate. Not saying they can't, they just tend to be slower. They also have miles and miles of bureaucracy and red tape that you have to get through to get something new in there. So then any new employer, most new employees that get there will kind of feel that like, what's going on here? Those organizations are also highly reactive and not proactive. And this could be for a variety of reasons. You know, they might have gotten burned in the past. They might be in a market where the tried and true is actually what we need to do. You know, I don't know why that rhymed, but that might be an industry thing. And so then you get somebody new in that's like highly like fast paced and innovation, you know, I want to experiment and stuff like that. That philosophical difference can definitely lead to fractures of relationships, lack of trust. And so it definitely could be toxic on both sides. The person actually in that environment and the people that are upholding the environment. Both those, right? And so what's necessary to like get through things like that is to, first off, organizations need to understand what their culture is and not like make assumptions about it. So let's say I had a culture where we have approval process on top of approval process, and we have rules in place and priorities and, you know, SOPs and, you know, we have all these procedures you got to follow. Don't get too creative. I need to be able to understand that's my culture and explain that to new employees as they come in, because own it. You need to own it. If there's some kind of benefit as a company for how you do that, let's say you worked in healthcare, you've got a lot of regulations. So we have a lot of regulations and we have all these procedures down. So do not go experimenting and trying new ways to do IVs because we have a certain way you do an IV for safety reasons, you know?
Right.
And so you need to be able to understand the culture you currently work in so that when people come in and they're like a bull in a china shop, you can help course correct them into the culture. But at the same time, ask questions as to why do you think why did you go over this person's head? Why do you think why did you skip the approval process? Because I need to be able to explain to you why it matters. You also want to learn from those folks too, though. Well, what can we do better?
Right.
Do we have to? Do we you know what? Why do we have 3 levels of approval? Let's look into doing something different. You know, so it's like both and.
Yeah.
How can we be? You didn't ask me to solve that problem. You asked me to define toxicity. So, but I'm sharing with you that like, yes, that definitely could be toxic, but not because of the person that's maybe in the wrong company or bad fit per se. It's probably toxic more so because we didn't sit down and kind of have that overarching conversation about cultural expectations and norms, nor did we make space to evolve the culture over time based off of new information, new employee way of working, because that's another thing too that the organization can do.
Okay, so let's just say now we've decided that something's toxic, whether that label's helpful or not, but there's a problem and we need to do something about it. What's the impact to the organization if we don't?
That is great. I love that question. And every time we say the word toxic, I'm always going to dive under the iceberg on purpose. So let's say we had a behavior we labeled as toxic, and that behavior is you have a supervisor who is constantly micromanaging their employees' work. And the employees are coming to HR and they're like, hey, I can't even do my job. I don't feel trusted, right? So like I've seen it so many times where the organization chooses not to do something because of who that supervisor is. They might be the leading salesperson and they do all this, they make all the sales of the company. So we're not gonna do something about it. We're not gonna do something about it. HR's hands are tied all of a sudden. And there's this research construct called perception of organization support. And perception of organizational support is essentially the employee's perception of if their organization cares about them or not really. So now, if I have an organization where the perception of organizational support is lower because now the organization is not responding to my emails or people aren't, I'm not being heard and this behavior is still happening to me, well, you better believe when another job pops up on my LinkedIn alerts or something, because I already set alerts. So if my alerts ping out and there's a job that I can apply for, I don't really have the a good memory of the organization to hold me back from applying and going out for that role. And let's say that, like, you might have been protecting this top salesperson, but imagine all the institutional knowledge that gets lost when employees leave. And now you're losing all that institutional knowledge, and there's a revolving door. And am I going to, like, I might not talk bad about you in the interview process at my new job. I know the rules there, but you better believe if somebody says, hey, should I work at that company? I'm going to say, nah, not if I were you. So now you lost some cheerleader. You've lost somebody that would talk positively about your organization. That's actually what I've seen in some of the research on employee coping is that sometimes, and I guess this is another thing you could see, that another impact. Sometimes when an employee doesn't feel like the organization has supported them in toxic environments or abusive supervision or what have you, a form of justice is sabotage. And it could be purposeful sabotage or non-purposeful sabotage. And it could be literally, hey, they don't recommend your product to their family anymore. They're not buying your product anymore. It could be something as little as that. It could also be them, a form of sabotage that's indirect could be, they're just slower at work for some reason. And they don't know they're doing it. You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of people don't know. But
sometimes they do know they're doing it.
But sometimes they do. No, sometimes, let's be clear. Sometimes they definitely do. But what I want to say is sometimes they're like, oh, you know what? You're not taking care of me. I'm not working the weekend. And I probably used to want to work the weekend. I'm not giving you 110%. I'm just going to do the bare minimum. And I'm okay. But that's a thing. And that is a form of justice for people, because people go back to, like, they came to you because they had a situation they felt was out of their control. So a form of justice is the impact that'll happen is people will start looking for their locus of control, and they'll pull any lever that they have. And so that's what you're going to see, like, interpersonally. That could hit the bottom line, that could hit the culture, that could hit the way you talk about your business. And then I didn't even get to the cost of turnover and the cost of rehiring somebody and the cost of employment lawsuits. There's a lot, and so it's very costly, both, from a relationship standpoint as well as a financial standpoint.
So if somebody watching or listening to this is struggling with toxicity in the workplace in their own, like, not that they're not perpetuating it, but they're struggling with it, what tips do you have for them?
Yeah, I mean, tips on the onset are resources. I will start with resources.
Okay.
And let's start with external resources. So the external resources that would be helpful for folks would be definitely having a conversation with the human resources department.
Okay.
Is a thing there. And I'm not saying that because I'm a former HR person. I'm saying that because that's also a strategic move for the employee, meaning the employee having a conversation with human resources, they should also document that conversation with human resources and send, like, what I would do. I used to tell people this all the time, even when I worked in human resources, send the person you talk to in HR an email after you meet with them and document what y'all talked about and document what you're going to do next. Because that way, hey, that's documentation in case you ever needed to bring it up in the future. Because I've seen a lot of times where the moment somebody brings up that it's a toxic workplace or it's something's wrong with their department, let's say it's their supervisor, all of a sudden the supervisor's watching your time clock for some reason. All of a sudden your supervisor's scrutinizing your work way different than they were before, way different than any other employee. All of a sudden your performance appraisal metrics are way different than they were before. And, so now we're having some, like, retaliation because now the supervisor is like, oh, well, I don't like you anymore. So now I'm going to measure you differently than ever before, which that's wrong too. And so what I would tell employees is definitely utilize your external resources. And HR is there to, they have employee relations skill sets and departments. So utilize it and talk to them. Another external resource, definitely utilize any organization provided EAP. Or hotlines and stuff like that, utilize those. And then also outside of work, if you have folks, a mentor, a therapist you can talk to, stuff like that, having that resource system is, like, excellent to have even outside of toxicity. I think those kinds of things need to be in place proactively regardless. So that's a bevy of external resources. Now, internal resources. One of the biggest things that happens, I guess one of the major things that happens to individuals when they're in environments that we would label as toxic is sometimes and oftentimes we tend to gaslight ourselves into making it like it's our fault that something happened to us when sometimes it's not. And so you need to get your internal resources together. So the internal resource perspective is really looking at how do you maintain your composure? How do you maintain your self-management? How do you maintain your self-compassion? Because these toxic work environment situations are highly stressful, and sometimes our defense mechanisms manifest where we gaslight ourselves. Because remember what I told you, we don't have control of stuff.
Yeah.
And so since we can't take out whatever emotion we want to take out on our supervisor, which like when I say take out, it could be I want to just have a conversation with my supervisor.
Yeah.
Look, so like I can't get it out, so I'm going to punish what I can control. And you tend to punish yourself. And so in order to like not get into that trap of that self-censoring and self-harm as it relates to that, gaslighting yourself, write your thoughts down and do some self-journaling, some self-talk, and really get out what you need to get out in that standpoint. And always be looking for a way to lift up your voice. And so to basically get out what you need to get out, you want to be able to, it's called metabolizing your emotion. You don't want to let these emotions sit in here. You want to like process them. And so what I say by that is, let's say I don't feel brave enough yet to confront my supervisor about micromanaging. And when I use the word confront, let's just say I'm having a conversation and presenting them with my feelings.
Yeah.
Okay. So like I need to get myself together first. And so like I need to be able to have a conversation about what are the risks of me not saying something? You know, what are the professional risks? What habits am I learning by staying in this state? You know, because quitting the company is not a privilege that everybody has. You know, I'm not saying everybody can quit and go find a job at the same rate of pay, or everybody has the confidence to quit, or everybody has the network to quit. I am not. So I will not be a practitioner that says, oh, just quit. And not everybody has that luxury. And so from that standpoint, you being able to be resilient in the current place that you're at will require you to say something and do something about it. And so while you're working on figuring out how to do it and have that conversation with whomever it is, there needs to be journaling. There needs to be like some self kind of work you want to do. But you're always planning on your plan, like always. And so then some really tangible tactical tools that people can do, that internal work to bring it outward, could be something like nonviolent communication. That is a really tangible tactic that people can utilize to state your feelings, to state what needs you have to individuals who are perpetrating some of that toxic behavior. Nonviolent communication is a great tool to use. And really, when I say tool, I think nonviolent communication is foundational to how we should communicate in the first place. And so when I say tool, don't mean only use it during this time. No, you should be able to you should be able to state how you feel at all times, not just when you're in a toxic work environment. So I don't want it to be like use it only in this situation. You use nonviolent communication to like really communicate your needs that are not being met. That's something I think you should do.
That was amazing. Like there was so much in there. What about if you think, and it's not your supervisor, it's a coworker, like that salesperson who gets the sale at all costs. What do you suggest in a case like that of trying to put some perspective around that individual and the harm they're causing?
Yeah, I mean, so like let's put perspective to that individual. So all behavior makes perfect sense, first off. So what that really means and why I say that is, as a behavioral scientist, when I look at like behavior and systems, people do everything that's the path of least resistance and that's going to get them the most reward typically. And that reward is not necessarily financial. That reward could be, hey, I have less stress. That reward could be, hey, I'm not working on the weekend. Whatever your reward system is, right?
Yeah.
And so all behavior makes perfect sense. And even the behavior that don't make sense to us, it makes sense to them. So if I look at that salesperson and they're getting sales at all cost, underneath their kind of intimidating, aggressive behavior towards their coworkers could be them thinking about spending time with their kids and having the money to do it. Could be them running away from a financial, chip on their shoulder that they had because they grew up lower socioeconomic, lower income,
Right.
and so lower SES. And so with that being said, that makes sense. I mean, you can make sense of that.
Yeah.
It has a toxic like output,
Yeah.
affect. But if I try to think about this person as another human being, there could be reasons why this person acts the way they do. And I try to take that perspective first, because one of the biggest gaps that occur between relationships is dehumanization. And we dehumanize, and so in order to hate something, we have to dehumanize. That's like an easy way to hate something. That's an easy way to just have a us versus them, is I'm going to dehumanize them. And so I don't want people that are listening to this to get into their habits and to like solidify dehumanization. So I'm saying, look, that person might be treating you a certain way, but that doesn't mean you need to dehumanize them. You actually need to humanize them more. And so I want to look at this person as a human, and I want to walk into any conversation with the fact of, though I carry baggage and they're harming me, I don't know what baggage they have and what harm is being to them either. Because that way you're not taking it personal, because if you take it as a personal attack, you're going to try to respond with another personal attack, or like a reciprocating attack. And so like, or you might be defending. Sometimes people do stuff where we're defensive, where that had nothing to do with us, and you just made it personal. And so like, so again, I'm starting at your house. You got to clean up your own house. You got to clean up your own side of the street, because we always try to fix somebody else, when in reality, maybe it's us, and looking at our mindset is probably the first thing we need to do. And so that's where I'm starting.
Yeah, and I so agree with that. But for those people out there, somewhat like me, who have a tendency to blame themselves, as you were saying earlier, gaslight themselves.
Yeah.
How do you balance that? Don't gaslight yourself, but clean up your own house.
Yes. Yeah. And by clean up your own house, only thing I'm saying there is you are checking your biases.
Okay.
You're checking your biases. That's all you're doing. Because what tends to happen is we get into a mindset of, oh, this person did this to me. So we like myopically only focus on the harm that they're doing, and not trying to think about, well, what else might be true?
Okay.
Like, what else might be true? So like, what I'm thinking is like, but you want to confront that person. So instead of going in there like, how dare you? You aren't, you did this to me, da da da. Okay, well, guess what? If you walk into that situation like that, what are the chances of you being successful? Like, I mean, at the end of the day, you want to be successful. So what are the chances of you being successful?
Not very high.
Right. So not high. So you can still have feelings about how you're being treated, but you can walk in there looking at them and speaking to them as they are human.
All right, we're getting to the end of this. Where could someone learn more about toxicity?
Let's use it as an umbrella term. Let's call it umbrella term. You can visit me on the toxicleadershippodcast.com. I could be visited, and you can hear more on my LinkedIn, Dr. Kevin Sansberry. I'm on LinkedIn. I post every weekday, and I also do live streams on LinkedIn where we have conversations around, furthering and defining like toxicity and workplace culture and belonging. We just did some work on nonviolent communication today. So like all kinds of different conversations that I have. And I have those live on LinkedIn and on YouTube, and then I put those on the podcast. And so any place you can hear a podcast, you can find the Toxic Leadership Podcast with all of my episodes on there.
Awesome. Sounds amazing. All right. Well, thanks, Kevin. That was just so amazing. Like I said early on that I feel lighter, and I think I just benefited so much from diving into what exactly toxicity really means. And now I'm super looking forward to the conversation that he and I are going to have around HR's role in toxicity. So watch for that. It'll probably be coming 5 weeks after this one. I did an episode on psychological safety, which is really helpful. And then I refer to the one I did on mindset. Those are right here. Thanks for watching out there. We'll see you next time.